Okay, so let's switch to our presentation, which is, like I said, this presentation that we're going to follow today is this Blitz Introduction to C++ Objects and Classes. I just opened the handout format and a quick overview that again, we often we deal with in software. We deal with conceptual things, like for instance, a date, or calendar, or driver license, or a person, or address, or telephone number, or something that represents a piece of physical equipment, like a dialing modem, or microwave, or tea kettle. So a lot of things do appear to be conceptual, and they can be successfully represented as objects. The main definition of an object is that it's something that exists in memory, and it could have arbitrary set of fields, data values inside of object. It occupies unique place in memory, and once created, it stays in that memory and contains all the data. In addition, we can associate functions that work directly with that data. So let's go to discuss date in the broader scope. How do we handle dates in software? We can just simply use this cout statement that prints them as strings, right? And that would be possible to use to display information on the screen. However, this is terribly hard-coded and obviously not very useful. So how can we improve? Well, we need something that we call programmatic control over this stuff. And what needs to happen is that we want to be able to display dates. And in order to be able to display them somehow, we need to store them internally in a manageable form. Like, for instance, was the case with this month, day, and year, three integers combined together. We can input dates from the user. Obviously, we need to be able to support that kind of functionality. And sometimes user is a user sitting in front of the keyboard, but sometimes the user is just another part of the program. So we need to be able to store dates in files or databases. We need to perform the calculations. And calculations involve, like, manipulating dates, advancing them, or rewinding them into the past. And we also need to be able to compare them. The dates should be comparable, just like integers. 2 greater than 4, or today is less than tomorrow. That's how it should work. In addition to the fact that the dates are all uh, have direct connection to the calendar, to the idea of the calendar, it comes with the notion of weekdays and holidays and weekends, and other details about the dates. That includes centuries and the months and the years and leap years and all sorts of things that we recognize inside the calendar structure. So obviously, from that original version of printing text, hard-coded dates, we need to switch to a numeric representation. And we use date today as example of an object, which is very usable, very helpful. But recall that we had the homework where we needed to compute serial Julian date. Just a quick a reminder that the homework that we worked on was asking us to create a function named serial Julian date, like this, which would take 3 integers, month, day, and year, in whatever order, and be able to compute a single serial integer, which would just represent each unique integer that this function would return back, would represent a specific date. So to get started with today's project, I actually would like to create two files. Number one, I would like to go to my source file and say source files list and say add new item. And I will add a new file that says serial date. Notice that this is an implementation file or source file, C++ with extension CPP. You can see my extension CPP over here. And by default, it already is pointing to my source subfolder, which I created originally when I added main file. So I just click add, and this should create a new file. So the new file is created, and knowing that I'm going to share, and by the way, what is going to happen here if I switch over here, I would like to essentially copy and paste these three function declarations into my new file, right? And adjust everything properly and convert them to actual functions like this, right? So instead of being function declarations, I am converting these declarations to actual functions. And of course, they all return integers. So the purposes of these functions are serial Julian date. Of course, I'm not going to repeat everything that we did in homework. I will simply say return 0, right? So this is like, it's not really implemented, but the idea is that I have a function that takes 3 integers and returns some unique number back. And my choice is to just, for the purposes of demonstration, I'll just return 0. It doesn't matter what the actual conversion is. Of course, we have the homework that describes in detail what it actually should do. So once this integer is computed, then we can pass this into these functions to convert back and recompute, basically taking this date and recompute it and return back the month. So for now, again, for the purposes of demonstration, I'll simply return December, let's say 12. And for the day, I can return 31st, December 31st. And for the year, I can return 2020. How about 2019, which was a happy year, I think, so far, given the coronavirus situation. So here we go, 2019, December 31st. Right? So these are not real functions that they all using hard-coded values, but since I have them part of my project right now, it's good for me to have something like this that I can use for our demonstration, putting together a structure named date and using these functions. So how about, because in order to be able to share all these functions which were added to this file, let me copy its full path and add it to the top of my file, which is my usual habit. I keep names of the files right at the top of my files when I create them. What I want to do is I want to share this file with the rest of my application. In order to be able to share these functions with the rest of my applications, I need to produce a corresponding header file, which doesn't exist yet, but I will go ahead and create it. And there I will use these function declarations, and by including that header file elsewhere in my application, I can get access to these functions.